2015. My name is Ian Alexander, and I am joined today by Susanna Gilbert, who is Marketing Manager here for Talemetry, and also Stephen Schwander, who is our Director of Client Services. Good morning, Susanna and Stephen.
Good morning.
So before I get started today, I wanted to kind of just maybe talk a little bit about Stephen. You've been in this recruiting game a long time, and we haven't talked about it in past webinars, but I just wanted to kind of maybe have you give like a thumbnail of what you've been doing for the last several years.
Sure, yeah, I've been in the recruiting business per se since about '98, which was kind of before the internet started taking off. In fact, I remember I started as a headhunter for a Wall Street firm, and I think Career Mosaic and Monster were just getting their start, but we'd get fired if we jumped on those things. So I go all the way back to Smile and Dial. And then I managed recruiting for several companies out in New York, and then I managed recruiting operations for about 8 years for a Fortune 500, and it was a global role. And then I went out and did some consulting, helping a large UK bank manage some change and implementations and put tools in place. And I've been with Talemetry now doing a very similar thing for about the last 3 years.
Awesome, great. Well, it's great to have you with us here, Stephen, and I should say I head up marketing here for Talemetry, and I kind of bring the marketing spin to the recruiting side of things. I've been in marketing my entire career, starting out at American Express and working for companies as diverse as Birkenstock, and for the last 25 years I've been in the HR software space for a number of different companies. So just wanted to kind of get that out of the way up front. Welcome everybody who's joining us from around the country. Talk a little bit about the agenda, but before we get into the agenda, I just want to point out that we welcome questions. We try and make these webinars more of a conversation than a presentation, although you'll get a little both. So please feel free to just kind of chat us your questions in the questions console, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar console. And Susanna will collate those and either feed them in at the end of the presentation, or if they're relevant to what we're talking about at the time, she'll jump in with them as well. So feel free to do that. And then the biggest question is, can I get slides, or will there be a recorded version? And yes. Those will be mailed to you about 24 to 48 hours after the presentation. Most likely you'll get a link to the recorded version of it. So what we're going to talk about today is candidate attraction. So first we're going to define what we're talking about in terms of candidate attraction. We're going to go over some of the recruiting challenges that make new candidate attraction strategies necessary. We're talking about some reasons for implementing those strategies, and then really want to spend most of our time on the key practices for success around candidate attraction in 2015. And then, of course, we'll have questions at the end. So, Stephen, I'll ask this question for you, since you're the guy with all the recruiting experience. What is candidate attraction?
Well, actually, I like the definition that we've got up on the screen, and I wish I could take credit for it, but it's just so simple and straightforward that it's basically the act of getting open positions in front of qualified candidates, and I like the end of that, in a compelling way. Regardless of whether we're talking about building pipelines or doing direct sourcing, or whatever the strategy is that we're employing to find qualified candidates, we need to be attractive to those candidates, and in order for them to be attractive, we've got to get the message out there. Most of us, if we recruit, we're recruiting against a specific job opening, and so that's why we've created the definition here, is to get these open positions in front of qualified candidates in a compelling way. Now, I think, Ian, you might have to push your slide forward one, I'm not sure. I'm not seeing that. Okay. Now, how do we do that? So I realized I was out in ERE this past week, and some of you may have been out there as well. And Jerry Crispin and Career Crossroads, they really have pointed out that by and large, job boards and career sites continue to account for about 35% of the attraction activity. And so it's really keen that we have a really good website and we have a way to distribute out to all of the job boards or all of the destinations, I'd rather say. And the reason I say destinations is because companies are using a wider and wider net. Meaning that the go-tos that and again, I already told you I've been in this business since for a long time, so the go-tos, like let's say Monster Career Builder, they're still very active, but they're not accounting for anywhere near the percentage of hires or activity as they were before. So now companies are looking to put out the widest net possible. So we're talking about job boards in the traditional sense and in a newer sense of the term. We're talking about social networks, although most of distribution on social networks is very similar to posting out to job boards. It's just a matter of where candidates are actually seeing those. Digital and display ads. We've got clients that spend a ton of money on digital ads. Some of it's wasted. Some of it's very targeted and effective, and you have to know the difference with that. It's getting the word out to events, and not only on the day of the events, but in advance of the events. And for some of us, it's going to continue to be getting the word out to recruitment agencies for those specifically hard to fill positions. So really, that's kind of candidate attraction in a nutshell. Getting the open positions in front of qualified candidates in a way that compels them to respond.
Okay, and we'll talk about the breadth of that in just a bit, but let's talk about the recruiting challenges.
Yeah, I think these are really important for us to keep in mind. So, with the definition, I went really broad in terms of what it is to distribute and create some attraction, right? So, what are some of our challenges? Well, number one is the poor candidate experience. Now, the wider you attract, right? Sometimes you don't have control over the quality of what's happening out there, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But what are some poor candidate experiences as a result of this activity? Number one is applying for closed requisitions. Well, how does that happen? When we distribute jobs out into the marketplace, people are scraping those jobs and redistributing them, and you and I don't even know it, right? And all of a sudden, the job's been closed in our ATS, but that redistributor, 3 generations out, hasn't closed the requisition. So there's a lot of issues with poor candidate experience from that point, and it's really about closed recs, it's about outdated links, and it's about personal information getting hijacked by these third-party aggregators. You think you're applying for a job, and all of a sudden you've just joined some third-party database, and now you're getting emails from that third-party database. You say, well, wait a minute, I thought I applied for a job at Acme Company. Why am I getting emails from this other unnamed vendor over here? So that's poor candidate experience is a real challenge we need to keep in mind. The second one is just not enough good candidates. Remember I said I had defined this rather broadly, and I think you do need to define it broadly, but then if you distribute each and every job as broadly as any other job, you now are creating too broad an attraction strategy, and you just yield more and more unqualified candidates. So it's sort of a balance of strategy. I want to distribute as broadly as possible, but I want to distribute as focused as possible. We'll get to that in a moment. And then the next thing is lack of scalability. So if a job opens up in my applicant tracking system, it comes into my recruiter, and now my recruiter's got to log into Indeed or Monster or Career Builder and get those jobs posted out there, or they've got to log into 2 or 3 aggregators, because this aggregator drives my OFCCP reporting, this aggregator drives my free reporting distribution. It's very difficult to scale, and your reactive time just isn't fast enough. You also have some stagnant budgets out there. So I deal with a lot of clients, and when we're looking for ROI, where can you save money? It's very difficult to save money in job distribution, because most of us had our budgets cut 5 and 6 years ago when the economy was bad, and those budgets by and large have not increased. They may have increased incrementally because there's more open jobs, but they're not increasing exponentially. So we're having to create more candidate attraction activity with the same or smaller budgets than we did 10 years ago. There's definitely a lack of awareness. There are so many channels out there, it's impossible to be aware of all of them. So how do we get get our jobs out very quickly to those new channels. And then here's a really difficult one: is the poor visibility into what's actually working and what's not working. I actually read this week again out at ERE that more than 3 out of 4 companies are still relying on drop-down menus. When your candidates apply for a job, how did you hear about us? And so there's still a real poor visibility into how all of these channels are working together, number one, and then number two, all of the distribution places within each channel, how are those working? So the data is very important for us, but it's very difficult for us to get the information back on. So, and here's a couple other challenges, by the way, in terms of not knowing what's happening. Some of our clients are using a new aggregator, and they either know it or they don't know it, and so they're getting false readings. And I'm not going to put names out there, but what's happening is they're getting false readings as to where traffic is coming from, because those new aggregators now come in and they start to give their data overlaid against the other data, and frankly, there's some false readings there. The second issue that we've had with clients not understanding performance is that there are, let's say, some distributors out there who also provide other services on the career site. And so if somebody sees a job on, let's say, job board A, and they come to your career site, but that career site is using, let's say, a Google Map tool or something like that, all of a sudden the data changes, and so you get false readings as to what distributor or what channel is actually producing that applicant. So there's a lot of challenges out there as the world gets more complex and there's a lot more opportunity. The visibility is getting to be even tighter.
Yeah, and I think the top one and the bottom one are very linked there in terms of the bullets. When you have stagnant budgets and you're looking for ROI to get more out of what you have, really the more you know, the more you can optimize, and we'll talk about that a little bit a little bit farther down the road. So we talk about how modern candidate attraction strategies can help us. They all start with segmentation, and this is a theme that runs through everything. Everything that is recruitment marketing. It starts with understanding by job family who you are targeting, because that's going to drive everything that flows, certainly in the attraction arena, but also across everything you do in recruiting. And one step below that is really use personas, and personas come out of the broad marketing world. It's a way of defining and putting a name and face to who you're actually marketing to. So we all know kind of position titles, professions, skills, competencies, etc. But digging a layer deeper and really finding out what drives that person, and taking a broader look at what are their hobbies and modeling your ideal candidates. We'll talk about that a little bit later. As we talked about utilizing expanded channels, as you see, as we talk about job distribution, the days of it being job boards are kind of over, because there are other distribution channels beyond that. There's agencies, there's events, there's digital advertising, pay-per-click advertising, and social distribution. It's all the same thing, and it needs to be looked at and measured in the same way. Then a big one, which is centrally control and automate. Stephen kind of touched on it before. In the most progressive organizations that we see that are doing some really amazing stuff are the ones that are centralizing the distribution across all their channels and taking some control over it, so that the organization has some intelligence about how they've segmented their jobs, and they're taking that burden off the recruiters to do that on an individual basis. And by and large, at least 80% of the distribution that they're doing just happens automatically when a rec is open based on the job family. And that's a powerful tool for not only increasing your standardization and centralizing your knowledge about the results that you're getting, and leveraging it across the organization, but also in saving time and saving money. And then obviously continuously analyze and refine that mix, so that you're constantly learning more and focusing your dollars and your time and effort in a more focused way. And so as we look at, oh yeah, Stephen.
Ian, yeah, not to interrupt here, but I was just thinking how counterintuitive what you just said sounds, right? Because I remember back in the day when I was a desk recruiter, and I wanted ultimate control, and I had that value add. And to me, when I think about centralized distribution, right, and automation, it just seems counterintuitive to trying to target the message to the right people. But the key here is your systems and your tools. So you've got a lot of data in your applicant tracking systems that we call metadata, right? So job families, for instance, and skill sets that are required, and locations. These are all very simple metadata items that can be used in a rules-based environment to help drive very specific targeted distribution. So, it might not be enough to say, what, all call center jobs go to CareerBuilder. Maybe CareerBuilder doesn't deliver on your call center jobs in the Southeast. You don't know that unless you're able to report, right? So, but maybe Monster does in the Southeast, but CareerBuilder is better for you in the Chicagoland region for that specific job style. So when you know that, then you can create rules-based job distribution. So it just struck me as a little bit funny because it sounded counterintuitive, but it really makes sense when you think through the data that we have in the systems.
Yeah, good point. Um, so as we look at that whole sort of that whole move towards more modern strategies, where that kind of falls in what we call our recruitment marketing maturity model, it typically falls between sort of a functional model where you've kind of got automated job distribution and advertising, and you're distributing out to free and diversity sites to where so you're starting to centralize that. You've got the automation in place. You're getting a little bit more sophisticated in how you're doing that. You're moving towards some additional kinds of programs like pay-per-click advertising, social site advertising, referral programs, and really digging in on that central automation portion of it. And that becomes even more important on that central automation. Am I saying that right? You're automating. Okay, I won't even try and say it. It's a little early in the morning here out in California. And then finally, so you're moving towards that optimized place, and that's where the centralization comes in. And you can get access to that chart within the slides that'll be mailed to you. So this is really the meat of the presentation where we talk about some of the key candidate attraction practices, and this is kind of based on what we see out in the marketplace as we do work with clients, as we work with prospects, and as we continually build our internal knowledge base as we build solutions around these things. So segmenting, I talked about it before, and Stephen, I'm just going to jump in first on this. This is key to everything you do, as I said, and it goes beyond skills and competencies and job titles, but really, what kind of hobbies does that person, does your ideal candidate have? What kind of media do they consume? What kind of stores do they shop at? What are some of them, maybe some of their core values? Are they success driven? Are they family oriented? Are they, where does their work-life balance, fall? And do that by title. The more specific you can go, there are many on the marketing side. We often give our target customers names, and we create pictures of them. And granted, one thing I want to say here is that on the traditional marketing side of things, you can go much deeper into a persona than you could from a human resource standpoint when you're talking about modeling your ideal candidates. So we go kind of crazy on the marketing side with some stuff that might not be appropriate for from a human resource standpoint. But really as deeply as you can. Do those, because those are going to inform you in terms of how do I write this job ad, what things are going to appeal to them, where do I distribute this job ad. The more you know, again, and the places that you get that is using your experience, because many of us have been doing this for a while. Use your imagination. No law against that, and use hard data and traits from some of your current top performers. Really get a sense of who they are. And you're not going to have just one persona for every job. You're going to have multiple types of personas, and that's okay. but really getting as specific as possible, I think, is the key here to success.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense, and I would just add that in terms of in terms of the persona, I always like to think part of my job as a recruiter, and John Sullivan is saying pretty soon it's going to be 100% of my job is literally selling, right? Selling candidates on jobs and selling hiring managers on candidates, and part of that persona for me is always what do these folks value, right? So in terms of that message, what are they valuing? Yeah, and our message out there is that they value a job that uses their skill set. Not quite, right? There's something far deeper than that. So it makes a lot of sense.
Certainly, and like I said, it helps you, helps you in that individual selling to that person's desires. It helps you in creating the ads and job descriptions that you'll be posting, and it helps you all the way through to what's the landing page going to look like when they get there, and what kind of content are we going to put there. The more specific you can be, you can see how it all kind of comes together. What kind of social messages are we going to send out? What kind of, how does that all fit together? And that becomes your blueprint. So compelling ads, again, speak directly to your candidates' strengths and desires. Again, using those information from the personas, and for if nothing else, don't use the bland job descriptions and ATS generated job titles, because they're not going to be that compelling. They're likely not going to help you once they get posted in terms of search engine traffic. You really need to put some thought into these things. So that's good. And I throw this ad up here because I think it's a good example of really knowing who your audience is and creating an ad that is very specific to a specific segment. And it's just one of many examples I could put up, but I think it does a good job of doing that.
And Ian, we can always tell when you and I do a deal like this, between what a marketing person will put on a slide and what an HR person will put on a slide, right, Ian? But that last comment that you made, Ian, about the bland job descriptions, I bet you if we ask the question, probably 90% of the folks here on just have no control over those job descriptions because they come straight out of our applicant tracking systems, and oftentimes recruiting, talent acquisition doesn't even have input into those. It's often compensation, frankly, that creates these, and so there are a lot of convoluted job descriptions out there and very compliant sorts of descriptions. But I think if you reach out to guys like Lou Adler that help understand how to write compelling job ads, and if nothing else, but a compelling job title, not the one that they're going to hire into, but the one that you're going to get posted out onto your career site, and that's going to go out onto the job boards, I think you're going to see a lot better response. And one of the things you can actually do to play with this and start to build some desire internally to do a better job at this is to do some A/B testing. So if you've got a really good job distribution system that allows you to send the same job out with maybe multiple job descriptions or job titles, then you could do some A/B testing and say, go ahead, put the one out that compliance requires you to put out, and put one out that people actually want to apply to, and you can start to see the difference in in the reaction and the response to those job titles.
Yeah, maybe I should have A/B tested that last slide. So the next one is reach candidates where they are, and this one is, again, it's driving that segmentation information, right? So you use that information. It helps drive where to post, the most appropriate channels, social networks, targeted job boards. I think, Stephen, you were talking before about that conundrum between broad and not broad. I think you want to go as broad as possible across a spectrum of different kinds of boards, but part of that breadth is lots of different niche boards that are going to reach those candidates where they are, as opposed to maybe one or two broad job boards that sort of speak to the general population of job seekers, and then trying to sort of attract the correct candidate to you from that broad pool of a lot of candidates to the more niche boards that may be more focused on engineering jobs, if that's where you're segmenting, or nursing jobs, or any other sort of highly sought after job or hard to fill kind of job. So so that will drive reaching candidates where they are. That's what that persona and that segmentation allows you to do. And we were just talking about it again, Stephen. Broad, go broad with your distribution. I'll let you take a crack at this one.
Sure. I think again, and we might be just sort of repeating ourselves here, but again, because there's so there's so much out there, and there's so many channels, and you don't know what the next new channel is going to be or where the right candidate is going to be. Again, you want a broad distribution, but by the same time, you want to do all of the great things that Ian was just talking about in terms of segmentation, because broad is great, but I'll use a ridiculous example. I mean, if you are sending out to a site, and I won't name sites, but if you're sending out to a site that typically is for low-end jobs, and you send an SVP role to that site, you just are sending the wrong message out into the marketplace. So you want the broad distribution across that type of job or across that segmentation, but you also want to be very careful as to where you're sending each job type. I think one that really gets messed up a lot, and not only with job posting, but even with email distribution, if you're sending out email invites, is the job level. Right? I can't tell you how many emails I get in any given week to be a recruiting coordinator, or even a Taleo admin. Right? Now, I've been a corporate recruiter for many years. I've implemented Taleo, more times than I care to admit, but that's not the right level of a job for me right now. So again, make broad, but segmented and targeted. So you've got a large number of channels, but you got to make sure that the channels make sense for the types of jobs that that you're sending to. So you want to optimize them by job family, but you also want to optimize them by level, and to some extent by location, which is a little bit more obvious as well.
And the reason for going broad, and I sort of jumped the gun on this slide on the last one, but the reason for going broad is because you're going to narrow that down based on the data that you get back. So over time, you're building that centralized knowledge of, well, these are the sites that and the channels that work best for me for this kind of job. But you don't know that necessarily right off the bat. So you want to go as broad as possible so that you can begin to whittle that down, and it becomes much more manageable. So include agencies, Stephen. That slide at the beginning, again, we talked about including things beyond just the standard job boards, and agencies are a source of distribution of jobs and candidates back, right?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think we probably all on this call, and some of us may actually be agency recruiters. We understand the role that particular headhunters play in, let's say, purple squirrel or very niche recruiting, or sometimes there's a need just to say, I'm going to outsource this piece of my recruitment so that my team can do the higher end stuff. You have tons of different strategies, but when it comes to putting together an overall strategy for distribution, and you want to be able to report back and be able to say to senior management, here's how all of my channels are operating, the one that gets forgotten all the time is agency, because all they typically will look at is how much money they've spent, and frankly the business usually spends the money and HR doesn't even report up on it. So you really want to be able to include agencies because they are a fit for purpose channel for very specific reasons, right? But you also want to be able to track it. And the clients that I've worked with have not necessarily worked with really difficult VMSs, right? So we're not necessarily talking about putting in a big difficult VMS. We're simply talking about a simple way to distribute, right? And then a simple way to track the results for that channel.
Right, and if we're attacking, again, stagnant budgets, the two of the biggest spends there within the recruiting and HR department is obviously job board spending and agency spending. So the ability to kind of work that all in as the same process allows you then to optimize them similarly, and help you get more efficient with getting more candidates in for every dollar spent, and obviously more of the right candidates.
Yep.
So use the right tools. Stephen, you're a tools guy. Tell me about the right tools.
Yeah, well, I think we talked earlier, and this is going to be wide because I don't know who else on the call in terms of um, what applicant tracking systems you're using and how you're managing your current career sites. But ideally, you want to have a centralized process for all of this so that you can track it, because in the end, you need to know what works, right? So you want to have a centralized job distribution tool, and ideally, you want to see that integrated across your entire platform so that you can manage all of the channels, because job distribution, like Ian said earlier, is not just about sending it out to the traditional job boards. You've got to send it out to social networks, and you got your pay-per-clicks, and we talked about agency. You've got niche sites. There are so many different ways to distribute. You don't want to lose any of those, so you want a nice central job distribution tool that includes all of those areas. We said earlier you want to try to automate as much as possible. So we've got a large client that literally posts thousands of jobs a month, and 85% of their jobs are distributed automatically, and only about 10 to 15% are what I would call, I don't want to say manual, but recruiter-driven postings, right? So you want to have as much automation as possible. And why do you do that? Because you want to get out to the market as quickly as possible. And then finally, you want to really be able to measure and refine, and even get creative, right? If you want to do some A/B testing in terms of job ads themselves, or you want to be able to see in real time, what's driving traffic to your specific job, and what's not. So you can optimize on a job basis or on a monthly basis. So you can look back and say, okay, what kind of traffic did I get from what sites, and if you can, push deeper into that. So not only what traffic did I get from what site, but how many of them got through to an interview stage, how many of them got through to a higher stage, right? So you start to track quality beyond just the conversion rates themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it goes back to that maturity model slide as well. I mean, I think a lot of us use multiple tools to do multiple jobs within recruiting, and that's obviously centralized around the ATS. But there's job distribution, there's candidate relationship management, there's career site solutions, and the natural evolution from a maturity standpoint is to gain those capabilities and get the value of those capabilities, but ultimately they overwhelm you when you have multiple systems that you're working with. So coming from the sales and marketing world, I'll tell you that the rise of sales and marketing automation took the same slope to where now centralized integrated platforms are the way to go, because you just simply can't manage multiple tools over the long run. The benefits of centralizing just become overwhelming as you get more sophisticated. And that takes us right into integrate with your ATS. So constant synchronization. What does that mean, Stephen, when we talk about job distribution?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and as I said, I told you my history, right? So I think I put the first applicant tracking system into a company called Reuters back in 2001, and I'll never forget, going through that decade, just trying to synchronize out to, and we used 2 or 3 different job aggregators during that period of time, and always having to make sure that the jobs were integrating out, and we were working with our ERP folks to get the job files out, etc. And so you want to make sure that you're deeply integrated with the ATS so that there's a lot less in terms of the synchronization mistakes that could take place. And I won't go into the detail of all the different ways to synchronize data, but some of them are going to create a lag, and are going to create some issues with dropped and dead links. So you want to make sure that you have a deep, reliable integration with your ATS, and one of the ways to do that is to pull live jobs straight from your ATS. Now there are plenty of opportunities out there where if the ATS can't do that, right? If there's no API and you can't do that, you can there are plenty of services that will scrape your jobs from your career site, and that if it's a necessary evil if you can't pull them straight from your ATS, but that's where you're going to start to denigrate the quality there. You want to make sure that closed requisitions get removed, and not only do they get removed, but you make sure that you've handled a really good candidate experience, so that if they do happen to click a job that's not currently open, your career site can recommend related jobs to them as they come back to that, so you have a good candidate experience. And you want to be able to use source tracking for full cycle analytics, right? So you want, again, the idea that all of your channels are tracked in one place, so that you're not overly dependent on your media purchasing company to give you all your pay-per-click advertising results, and your ATS to give you source of hire results, and your job distributor to give you results to whatever jobs are there. And then sometimes I run across clients who are using their current distributor for 3 boards, but then they've got 4 of them that are scraping their site, and it takes forever to get the analytics back. That's why Jerry Christman says 3 out of 4 companies right now really have a almost impossible time providing accurate source of hire statistics. So as we talk about some of the keys to candidate attraction, the first point is to use a single tier distribution, right? So again, it's coming out of one place, and we're distributing it through to one place. We just lost that slide, Ian. It might have been you might have lost your slide share. But I'll continue to talk to that. So what do we mean by single tier distribution? I think I made a comment about this earlier. There are sites out there that actually will take your jobs and then distribute them out to additional sites. And I'll include as an example, one that I think works really well, and that's Beyond.com has a whole family of job boards, and we work very deeply with Beyond.com because sometimes our clients are going to want to track the 4 or 5 job boards within the Beyond family that they want to track to, and that actually works okay, and it still falls into that single tier. But there are other vendors out there that are taking your jobs, and then you don't know where they're going, right? So it's almost multiple tiered at that point. You've paid job board X, and you're getting a report from job board X, but they're sending the jobs out to 5, 6, 10, sometimes 20 different job boards, and both the reporting is difficult coming back, and you've got those broken links, outdated jobs, bad candidate experience. You start to look at your SEO results. Have you ever done a job search on Indeed or even on Google and say, wait a minute, how is this same job is appearing on all these different job boards I don't even have any control over? So it helps you maintain control to use that single tier distribution.
Yeah, and it's good to have a system that'll show you sort of where your traffic is coming from, even the traffic that you didn't know you were getting, right?
Yeah, good point. Very good point. So not only tracking the things that you know, right? So you got the tracking URLs, but tracking activity that comes in, so you can say, wait a minute, what is all of this I didn't even know about?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the biggest blind spot when you talk about candidate experience, which is a bit of a different animal in terms of subject matter, but this is one of the biggest blind spots of just some of the horrendous candidate experiences, potentially good candidates can go through that are completely out of your control, unless you can identify them and then work to block them out.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a system issue, Ian. Sometimes it's a recruiter issue. So I've got a client with 400 recruiters, and I can't tell you how many times I get job alerts from some of those recruiters who work for that large company, and I know they're using systems, and I won't mention the names of those systems, that are not authorized by my client, and that tracking would never happen if I applied to a job from there. You'd never see that tracking. If it's a bad candidate experience, my client can't manage it because the recruiters are using another system for it. So
no. So everybody likes free, right? So take advantage of free. This one it seems kind of obvious, but not everybody kind of does it, or not everybody sort of orients their entire optimization strategy around free. Might be a good way of putting it, right?
Yeah, I think absolutely. We probably need to harp on this slide that much, but I would say this, that there's a tremendous amount of SEO. So you will never spend enough money on SEO optimization for your jobs to beat Indeed. Let's just put it that way, right? And so, why fight it? That is a huge source of traffic, and if you can maximize those free job boards, then you have the extra money to go the extra mile if you do need to either sponsor on Indeed or go to a more expensive niche site for those niche jobs. So free just gives you that much more leverage.
Yeah, and you might be getting better results from free from some of the job boards that you're spending big money on. So it's good to know that and sort of build your optimization strategy around that. At least let me know what I'm getting for free, and map that against what I'm paying against. And we've got clients who've just seen some dramatic results from that. So this is about sort of I actually got an email today from a competitor that talked about sort of you know, agnostic. The term was used, agnostic analytics, and that really has to do with just sort of there's a lot of special interests out there in terms of your vendors who are giving you views of what's working and what's not, right, Stephen? So what's an example of that?
Well, I had a great example. I was in with a client about a year ago, and we were doing a quarterly review on their traffic, and they saw a 20% decline in traffic from Indeed. I thought, well, that's weird, right? So we looked at their career site traffic in terms of referral URLs, what was coming in, and we noticed that there was a huge volume coming in from another vendor that we weren't tracking because they hadn't told us about them and sent it up. And what we declared from that was that this other vendor was charging them, certainly for the paid sites, but this other vendor was also then sending their jobs to Indeed. So what was happening was they were sending jobs through us free, right, to Indeed. They were then sending jobs to this other job board company, but who was then sending their jobs free, but then also they had the paid boards they were sending their jobs to, and all of the data that was coming back from those jobs on Indeed were getting credited, not to Indeed, but were getting credited to this other vendor, right? So it's just an example of how that happens. And then about a year and a half ago, we had a client that saw this huge, way beyond any of our other clients, results from yet another distribution mechanism, or destination, I should say. It was a social destination, and we couldn't account for it until we realized that they were using a widget on their career site that was produced by this social destination, and all the candidates were hitting that widget first before applying for the job, and so it was altering the results, right? So again, it's not only a matter of using independent tracking that you can get through a marketing platform, but then it's also being diligent about knowing where your jobs are being distributed, by whom, and making sure that they are in that tracking ecosystem.
Got it. And then automate everything. We've kind of hit on this, using persona-based rules, including diversity sites for all. And this kind of brings into what automated distribution can do for you from a compliance standpoint, right, Stephen?
Absolutely. If you don't have to work, you don't have recruiters having to go click to make sure it goes out to your compliance partners. You're not going to lose that, and you want to be able to accurately track the traffic that's coming back through, and then you go one step beyond. Maybe you have very specific diversity sites. Women and software women engineers group, for instance, or other sites that might not be in your OFCCP compliant partner, but might be very important to your strategy. Then you can say, listen, I want all engineering jobs to go to SWE, right? And it's just automated. You don't have to think twice about it.
Yep. And you can even go a step further. You can deal with a qualified service provider that can maybe take some of the liability off of your if you work that into your distribution, your auto distribution process, you can go a step further with some qualified service providers. Measure and optimize everything. Of course, above all, source to hire analytics. And of course, you need those source to hire analytics across all your distribution methodologies, because that's where you see sort of where your mix is, where your strengths are, and where you can funnel more effort in terms of time and money. But then dig deeper, right, Stephen? There's multiple checkpoints along the way that can help you optimize, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And you want to understand across the entire process, what are you looking to measure? So, I want to measure the people that saw my ad and came to the website and started looking. I want to measure those that started the apply, those that finished the apply, and then even beyond that, if you have a good integration with your applicant tracking system, there's no reason why your marketing system shouldn't tell you where did your hires come from. Of everybody that came from eFinancial Careers, how many actually got an interview, right? So you can define levels of quality across that selection process and track that back to your destinations.
Right, because you could have a bottleneck in the process before source to hire. Obviously, holy grail is source to hire because that's where the rubber meets the road. But you could have bottlenecks all along the way that you can optimize and change just in terms of process, procedure. It might be sort of some things on your career site. A number of different places that might have bottlenecks to that source to hire. So it's good to dig deeper. Measure and optimize everything. Again, I think we've hit on this pretty strongly. Advertising, and again, agencies are obviously your largest budget item in most cases, and you really need to analyze everything, not at a high level. Yes, at a high level, but then go down by layers, by job type, and then optimize your spending mix. Right, Stephen?
Well, yeah, and I think also, this is fairly obvious to most people, but the reality is you typically sit down on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis with the immediate purchaser and say, here's what you got for the last quarter. Well, meanwhile, you've already spent a ton of money by that point in time, right? So again, if you have a centralized distribution mechanism that shows you activity on a per job basis in real time, you can actually be optimizing in real time as well. Because you don't want to wait until you've spent $250,000 on something that's not working. We had a client that was spending $2 million on just pay-per-click ads alone, and based on quarterly and semi-annual reviews, they cut that down to $1 million. And then when they finally started looking at optimizing along the way, they've now got that spend down to $500,000. They've cut $1 million from the budget, and they've got $500,000 to put into better sources, right? So it's not just about taking that quarterly review, but it's about knowing what's happening in real time.
Yep, and are they getting less candidates or more qualified candidates?
Exactly. Yep.
Right, so great. And so that's kind of it for questions now. I know we had a bunch of questions, Susanna. I had seen them, but I've lost my access to the questions here. But I do have one here, which is, Stephen, as an agency recruiter, how important is marketing/creating exciting job ads when your ideal job candidate is a contractor who needs to start as soon as tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, listen, what are you trying to attract, right? Are you trying to attract the contractor whose contract ran out last week and is desperate for a job? Yeah, kind of you are, right? But by the same token, so is everybody else. And I can say this because I've got, I started on that side of the business, and now I've got a son on that side of the business. So this is a daily conversation around my dinner table. And so I think it's even more important, specifically, for your job title, because frankly, as an agency candidate, you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of where you're sending your jobs out to and how than most corporate recruiters do, and you have a little bit more flexibility over what you're able to write as you send those jobs out. I think it's far more critical for you to have that job ad that's compelling. Don't tell me you need a Java developer. Tell me you need somebody to save the world using Java development or whatever the value prop is for that specific job, because contractors are in it not only for the money, but because that's where the really interesting work is, right? If you think about it. So yeah, I think it's critical.
Okay, and Susanna, do we have some more questions?
Yes, we do. We have another one here. Can you give us a quick overview of the telemetry platform, how it differs from the average ATS and from other platforms?
Well, first of all, I'll just jump in and say it's not an ATS platform. It integrates with the ATS to do many of the things that we've talked about, everything from candidate attraction and just job distribution to candidate experience, from mobile and social targeted career sites and application processes to direct sourcing and talent networks and pipelining talent for the future and candidate relationship management. So it really takes those pieces that are at the front end of the hiring process that's really about marketing to candidates and gives you not only centralized tools but end user tools to do those very intuitively. So the first thing to understand is it's not an ATS. It works directly with your ATS and integrates in with it. And then how it differs from other platforms. I think if I remember the question, it kind of it had a couple of specific vendors. One which was a sourcing vendor that I believe does sort of social sourcing, finding candidates based on available social information out there. And what we really do is we take the assets that you have internally with your applicant tracking database and the assets that you have available to you out there, whether it be job boards or job databases for searching and sourcing tools, and we bring them all together into a recruiter-focused tool that puts it all in one place and give you the tools then to engage those candidates, whether it's through advertising or whether it's through email, et cetera. And then we drive the analytics on the back end. So I didn't want to make it just too much of a commercial, but that's kind of the general overview of what telemetry does.
Thanks, Ian. We have another question that just came in. Do you have any suggestions of where to find a source that will pull candidate demographics and resumes out of Monster and put them into a cloud CRM? Stephen,
that one's for you.
Yeah. So I wish I could read these. I can't because I lost the first half of that. So just read the question again for me.
Do you have any suggestions of where to find a source that will pull candidates' demographics and resumes out of Monster and put them into a cloud CRM?
Okay, so it's not so much a source as a tool, right? We do have a deep integration with Monster to do either what we would call real-time searching, which means that users of our tool will go out in real time and run a search in Monster, pull that data back, bring it into the CRM so that they're, I like to talk about, recruiters maturing. Because I'm old school, right? I always see the contact as being the starting point, not the ending point. And as an old school guy, I used to just have a name, a job title if I was lucky, and a phone number, and that was my start, right? Well, today we have electronic resumes, but it's still a start. So we pull that data in from Monster, Career Builder, I don't care what the data source is, into a CRM tool, in our case, the Talemetry CRM tool, and there you can work with it, you can mature it. If you have additional information, you can add to it. You can, send targeted email communications to those folks and really work with them to build pipeline. I think that's what you might be asking, and you will typically refer to the searching piece of it as a federated search, and then to the management of the relationship as the CRM. And so that's what the Telemetry Source and CRM product does.
Last question. I think we have time for one more. What if we don't have tools that will allow us to automate distribution?
So that's a really good question. I think I would probably try to go get one, right? And I'm gonna read between the lines that we're probably talking about either a very small organization, and I've done independent recruiting on the side where I don't have the money to go buy a telemetry system. But what I have done in that case is to look for vendors that I don't need to pay extra for, but I'm able to get out of my media spend, I'm able to get some of this tracking as well. So if you're, an independent recruiter, for instance, you might go to a free tool, like let's say Smart Recruiters, for instance, which is free, doesn't scale to an enterprise, and that's not what we're talking about here, but then you can buy your media through them and you'll get your tracking through them. You're going to pay for media anyway, so why not pay through it through a free source like that, or like Bullhorn, or even ZipRecruiter, at least you're getting some level of tracking from those for both free and paid sites. So yeah, the answer is if I don't have one, I'd get one, and I'd just get what I could afford, which would be free.
And to take it a step back further, I mean, there's a lot of things in this webinar that you can do, and the biggest one, as I keep saying, is segmentation. You don't need a tool to segment your jobs, to understand who you're marketing to. You need a tool to make the distribution of those things easier. But you don't need a tool to sort of do the blocking and tackling of really understanding who you're going after. And then you just sort of, as Stephen said, maybe some good suggestions about how to get those jobs out there. But, you're like a lot of organizations along the continuum from, sort of, I should say, more basic recruiting, less sophisticated, and moving your way on up. And those tools will come, and they'll come in the form of, sort of free tools and hard work, and then they'll evolve into more automation, and then before you'll know it, you'll have too many tools to use, and you'll be looking for a platform to sort of standardize on all that stuff. So it's all part of the continuum, but the blocking and tackling is still the same. The processes are still the same. So I think there's a lot you can take out of the webinar in that regard. So we're running up against the end here. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We do these every month. We're going to have one coming up next month, so if you'd like to be notified about that, we've got your name and we've got your email, and you'll see something from us in the email here and shortly. Or you can check on our website as well, or follow us on Twitter, and you'll hear all about this stuff. So again, thank you to Susanna, Stephen, and everybody joining us. Go out and have a great day. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian.